You want the truth. Fine, let's stop sugarcoating it. Let's peel off the layers of denial and let's talk like adults. Because behind every affair, behind every secret text, behind every broken marriage, there's a pattern. A truth so raw, most people don't have the courage to say it out loud. But I will. Married women have become the easiest prey, not because they are weak, not because they are naive, but because society designed it this way. They're hunted not by chance, but by a cruel system, by loneliness masked as loyalty, by emotional starvation in a home that once promised everything. She's married, yes, but is she loved? Is she seen? Is she heard? You think a wedding ring is protection? No. In this world, a ring is often just a target, because married women walk around with this invisible banner that screams, I don't remember the last time someone looked at me and actually saw me. And predators can smell that. They don't go after the loud, confident, single woman who knows what she wants. No, they go after the tired wife who silently cries while washing dishes, the woman who posts family pictures with forced smiles, but aches for someone to ask her, how are you really? She's the easiest prey because no one's been feeding her soul, and here comes a man, not her husband, but someone who knows the art of attention. He doesn't need to be handsome. He just needs to notice. He just needs to listen. That's it. A little attention, a little validation, and suddenly she feels alive again. She feels seen, and that's the dangerous part. You see, society teaches men how to chase. It teaches women how to sacrifice. But no one teaches a woman how to protect her emotional energy when her husband stops trying. No one prepares her for the day she realizes she's more of a mother than a lover, more of a housekeeper than a dreamer, and by then it's too late. She's starving, and someone somewhere is always ready to feed her exactly what she's missing. And don't mistake it, this isn't about lust. It's about lack of connection, lack of respect, lack of tenderness, and in that lack, a new form of hunger is born. And when you're hungry long enough, you'll eat anything, even lies, even danger, even sweet poison dressed like love. So no, married women don't cheat because they're wicked. They fall because they're empty, because they've been giving from a cup that no one fills anymore. And predators, they know that. They don't need to manipulate. They just offer what's missing. You want to stop the pattern. Then start holding men accountable after marriage the same way you expect them to show up before it. Start asking married women if they're happy, not just if they're loyal. And teach them that being a wife doesn't mean becoming invisible. Because this is the truth, most people can't handle marriage doesn't protect women. It exposes them. It exposes their needs, their hopes, their pain, and when that pain goes unspoken, it turns into silence. And silence is the loudest invitation for attention from the wrong source. So the next time someone wonders why married women are the easiest prey, tell them this: because she was loyal for too long to someone who forgot how to love her, and someone else simply noticed. But just because she's preyed upon doesn't mean she's powerless. Once she wakes up, once she remembers her worth, once she stops looking outward for what she should have demanded from within, she becomes untouchable. You want to understand why married women become vulnerable? You have to look deeper than the surface. It's not just about infidelity. It's not about temptation or weakness. It's about starvation. The kind you can't see, the kind no one talks about, the kind that slowly eats away at a woman's soul while the world keeps clapping for her loyalty. She's there every single day, showing up, folding laundry, preparing meals, waking up early to get the kids ready, staying up late to finish tasks no one even notices. She's managing chaos, absorbing emotional hits, and holding together a household that runs because she does. But no one's asking her how she's doing. Not really. No one's watching her fade while she's performing the role of a wife so perfectly that everyone forgets she's also a human being. This is where the starvation begins. Not because she lacks food or shelter or clothing, but because something vital has gone missing: the spark, the warmth, the emotional connection that once made her feel alive, seen, and cherished. And here's the dangerous part: she's not going to scream. She won't announce that she's breaking. She's not going to stage a protest. She'll just keep shrinking, quieter, softer, more numb, until one day even she forgets what she used to need. It's the silent sacrifices that strip a woman of herself. Not the loud fights, not the big betrayals, but the everyday absence of emotional intimacy, when her husband sits across the table but doesn't look up from his phone, when her body is touched but her heart is untouched, when she shares her thoughts and gets a nod instead of a conversation. That's when she begins to vanish, and yet she still shows up. The world will look at her and say, but she has everything: a house, kids, stability. And that's exactly why her pain is invisible, because emotional needs are not measured in material wealth. She could be wearing designer clothes and still feel naked emotionally. She could have a man beside her every night and still feel completely alone. And this is what most men don't understand. A woman doesn't need luxury. She doesn't crave constant praise. What she longs for is connection, real, genuine, heart-to-heart connection. She wants to be asked how she's doing, and she wants the question to be real, not robotic. She wants someone to notice when her energy shifts, when her smile is forced, when her silence is heavy. But when no one does, she adapts. She learns how to function without being fulfilled, and that's not strength, that's survival. And survival mode is where the danger begins, because in survival mode, she's not thinking clearly. Her decisions come from pain, not power, and when someone comes along, maybe at work, maybe online, maybe by accident, and looks at her like she's alive again, she doesn't fall because she's cheap. She falls because she's hungry. Do you understand how dangerous it is to ignore a woman's emotional hunger? It's like leaving a plant in the sun but refusing to water it. She may appear fine for a while, but over time she wilts, and when someone finally comes by with just a drop of attention, she blooms, not because he's better, but because he noticed. People are so quick to judge. She's married, how could she? But no one asks what she was missing. No one asks how long she went unnoticed. No one wonders what it's like to pour into everyone and have no one pour into you. That's the part society never wants to talk about, because it's easier to blame a woman than to admit she was neglected. She didn't wake up and decide to seek attention. That's not how it works. Emotional vulnerability is never planned. It's a consequence of neglect. It's a reaction to being treated like furniture in a house she helped build. And sometimes, even the strongest women crack, not because they're weak, but because they've been strong for too long without anyone supporting them back. And here's what's even more heartbreaking: most of these women don't even want to leave. They don't want affairs, they don't want drama, they just want their husbands to look at them the way they used to ask how their day was, to hold their hand with meaning, to talk, not just about bills and chores, but about life, dreams, memories. They don't want new love, they want the old love to wake up. But when that love stays asleep too long, someone else eventually comes along who's wide awake, and in her hunger she makes a choice she never thought she'd make. A choice driven not by lust but by longing, and what's even more tragic is that she feels guilt. Guilt for needing something basic, guilt for craving affection, guilt for finally choosing herself after being ignored for years. The world will crucify her, but they won't look in the mirror. They won't ask how they helped create her downfall, because no one wants to admit they left her starving. Let's be honest, this emotional starvation doesn't begin after 10 years. It starts slowly, one forgotten compliment, one too busy to talk evening, one ignored text, one missed moment. It builds, and because women are taught to endure, they say nothing. They keep giving, keep hoping. Keep praying that one day he'll notice again, but he's comfortable. He thinks the vows are enough. He thinks just being there is love, but presence without passion is just proximity. Being in the same house doesn't mean being in the same heart. And a woman can feel more alone in a marriage than she ever did as a single woman. So yes, married women become easy prey, but not because they're immoral, because they're starved, and starvation doesn't discriminate. You can be loyal and still long for more. You can be married and still feel abandoned. And when the emotional needs go unmet, she becomes susceptible to the first person who listens, really listens, and it's not just about romance. Sometimes it's just a friend, a coworker, someone who gives her that emotional stimulation her husband stopped offering. That person becomes a lifeline, a mirror, a reminder that she's still alive, still vibrant, still worthy of attention. And this is the irony. Many husbands don't even notice until it's too late. They only react when the damage is done, when the marriage is cracking, when someone else is texting her. But where were they when she cried in the shower? Where were they when she begged for conversation with her eyes? Where were they when she stopped smiling and no one asked why? You see, emotional starvation doesn't scream, it whispers. And if you don't listen to the whispers, one day they'll turn into explosions. And by then, it's often too late. So if you're in a marriage, ask yourself, when's the last time you made her feel alive, not just safe, not just provided for, but truly alive? When's the last time you looked at her like she's still the most beautiful woman in the room? When's the last time you asked her about her dreams instead of just her duties? Because here's the truth most people won't tell you. Women don't fall out of love. They fall out of connection. They fall out of being noticed, out of being nurtured. And once that disconnection is wide enough, anything, anyone who shows them warmth can feel like salvation. But it never had to get that far. Emotional starvation is preventable. But it requires awareness, presence, care, a husband who never stops pursuing his wife even after he's won her. Because the day you stop feeding her emotionally is the day you put her soul on a diet she never agreed to. So no, she's not prey because she's wrong. She's prey because she's been empty for too long. And when the hunger becomes unbearable, she'll reach for anything that feels like nourishment, even if it burns. Even if it's dangerous, even if it leaves scars. No woman walks into a trap with her eyes wide open. It always starts small. It starts in the spaces where she's been left empty, in the cracks her relationship forgot to fill. Married women are not naive, they're not foolish, but what they are, far too often, is emotionally unattended, and that is the precise ground where predators thrive, not in the light of healthy connection, but in the shadows of neglect. Predators don't hunt with teeth. They don't bare fangs or force their way in. They wait, they watch, they study, they listen, and when they find a woman whose spirit is slowly dimming from emotional starvation, they step in, not as wolves, but as comfort. They offer softness, presence, validation, things she's not even sure she deserves anymore, and that's what makes it dangerous, because it doesn't feel like danger, it feels like warmth. The predator knows something most people overlook. It's not the body that gives in first, it's the heart. The heart that's been ignored, the heart that's been dismissed too many times, the heart that's tired of trying to connect to someone who's emotionally checked out. And so, when someone finally makes her feel seen, heard, valued, not for what she does but for who she is, that becomes intoxicating. It doesn't matter if he's less successful, less handsome, less established, because what he offers is not material. It's emotional oxygen, and for a woman gasping for breath in her own home, that oxygen feels like life. So she leans in, not physically at first, emotionally. She opens up, she talks, she shares things she hasn't shared in years. And before she even realizes it, she's built an emotional intimacy with someone who's not her husband. People think predators are these aggressive, obvious manipulators. No, the most effective ones are subtle, gentle, strategic. They don't chase, they don't push, they invite, they listen, they fill the role her husband once filled, sometimes better. Because unlike a man who takes her for granted, the predator watches her carefully. He mirrors her emotions. He remembers the little things. He makes her feel like she matters again. And here's the most terrifying part. He doesn't even have to say much. Sometimes just one compliment, one deep conversation, one moment of vulnerability. That's all it takes to ignite something she thought had died inside her. Because women don't respond to pressure, they respond to presence. And the predator knows how to be present in a way that her own partner has forgotten. You want to know how a predator identifies his opportunity. He listens for the sighs, the subtle sadness in her voice. The way she talks about her marriage like a routine instead of a relationship. He notices the ring on her finger, but more importantly, he sees the emptiness in her eyes. That's his cue. He knows she's still loyal, but he also knows she's longing. And longing is the doorway to vulnerability. But the tragedy isn't just what the predator does. It's how easy it becomes for her to let him in, because she's not emotionally guarded anymore. She's emotionally exhausted. Her defenses aren't strong. They're worn out. She's been holding the marriage together by herself, emotionally speaking, for far too long, and now someone shows up offering her what she's been begging for in silence. And no, it doesn't always lead to affairs. That's not the point. The point is that predators don't have to seduce her body. They seduce her loneliness. They seduce her silence. They enter through the wounds her husband ignored. Through the nights she cried alone. Through the moments she tried to initiate connection and got dismissed, laughed off, or told she was being too emotional. That's where predators plant seeds. And what's worse is that society keeps feeding this cycle. Telling women to endure, to be strong, to stay loyal no matter what. No one tells them that emotional betrayal happens long before physical betrayal, that every ignored feeling, every missed moment, every absence of affection creates space for someone else to come in. Not because she wanted them to, but because her heart couldn't survive on empty anymore, and so the predator becomes her confidant, her outlet, her friend, and slowly he becomes the man her husband used to be. But now with an added twist, he's the one who sees her now, not from the lens of years and habits and routines, but with fresh eyes, with interest, with attention, and that interest starts to heal parts of her she thought were broken forever. That's how it happens. That's the truth no one wants to admit. It's not about morals. It's about emotional opportunity, and the worst part is, sometimes the woman doesn't even know she's being preyed on. She thinks she's just talking, just opening up, just finally connecting with someone after years of silence. But what she doesn't see is that the emotional bond she's building is slowly detaching her from the man she vowed to spend her life with. And once that emotional gap has been filled by someone else, the marriage is no longer whole. Her heart is no longer in it the same way. And even if she feels guilty, even if she pulls back, the damage is done. Because now she knows what it feels like to be noticed again, to be cherished again, and that contrast becomes the death sentence for the disconnection she's been tolerating for far too long. Predators aren't strong because women are weak. They're strong because men become lazy, because men forget that you don't stop courting your wife once you've married her, because men get comfortable and they confuse being in the same house with being in the same heart. And while they're out there assuming everything's fine, someone else is slowly stepping into the emotional space they abandoned. And let's be clear, this isn't about blaming the husband or excusing the woman. This is about understanding the battlefield. Emotional gaps are not harmless. They are not neutral, they are dangerous, and if you're not the one filling them, someone else will try. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but eventually, because the human heart wasn't designed to survive in emotional isolation. Every woman needs to feel desired, not just sexually, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. She needs to feel like her presence means something, like her heart is still worth chasing, and if the man she committed to forgets that, someone else will remember it, and that someone may not be better, but he will be present. And presence wins where performance fails every time, because you can provide, you can protect, you can play the role, but if you don't connect, you've already lost her. You just haven't seen it yet. So predators wait, and they don't even have to try that hard. All they have to do is listen, ask questions, remember her birthday, compliment her when she's not wearing makeup, tell her she's brilliant, not just beautiful. And suddenly, they become everything she's been missing. That's how it works, slowly, silently, strategically, and by the time she realizes what's happening, she's already emotionally compromised, already torn, already wondering what life could feel like if someone just loved her like that every day. And the saddest part, she probably begged her husband for that attention. She probably asked nicely. She probably tried to fix it before anyone else entered the picture. But when her efforts went unnoticed, she stopped asking. She stopped hoping, and that's when the predator saw his chance. So no, this isn't about temptation. This is about opportunity. This is about negligence. This is about emotional needs left unspoken for so long that someone else came along and answered the question her husband stopped asking. What do you need and how can I be it? And she answered, not because she wanted to betray, but because she wanted to feel again. To breathe again, to be human again, and the predator didn't force her. He simply offered her what she'd been denied. So understand this. The emotional gaps you leave in your relationship are not just empty spaces. They're invitations, invitations for someone else to step in. And if you're not actively protecting your connection, someone else is actively studying how to exploit it. Because in the end, it's not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about seeing her, hearing her, reaching for her even when life gets busy, because if you don't, someone else will, not because he's better, but because he's there, and sometimes being there is all it takes to take everything. She's been taught that her silence is strength, that enduring without complaint is womanhood, that sacrifice is synonymous with love. From a young age, she's praised not for asking, but for giving, not for expressing her needs, but for suppressing them. The more she puts herself last, the more society calls her a good woman. The more invisible she becomes, the louder the applause, and the tragedy is she believes it, because no one ever taught her that meeting her own needs is not selfish, it's survival. The married woman becomes the embodiment of quiet endurance. She wakes up early, sleeps late. She feeds others before she eats. She listens before she speaks. She cleans, supports, sacrifices, and smiles. Not because she always wants to, but because she's been conditioned to believe that's her worth. Her value is measured by how much she can stretch, not by how much she is fulfilled. And slowly, without realizing, she disappears behind the very love she's trying to uphold. She becomes the background to everyone else's life, the organizer of birthdays she's never celebrated for herself, the planner of family holidays where she never rests, the emotional sponge for everyone else's drama, while having no one to absorb hers. And every time she speaks up, there's a subtle reminder, you have a good life, you should be grateful. So she stays silent, because heaven forbid she seem ungrateful for the very crumbs she's learned to survive on. But here's what no one talks about: gratitude and starvation can coexist. A woman can be thankful for her family and still feel neglected. She can love her husband and still feel unseen. She can honor her responsibilities and still ache with unmet emotional needs. But society doesn't want to deal with that complexity. It wants women simple, silent, suffering with grace. There's an expectation stitched into the fabric of woman, who especially for the married woman, that her purpose is to serve. Her pain is noble, her exhaustion is beautiful, her self-denial is a badge of honor, and every time she suppresses her needs to cater to someone else's, she is applauded. They call her selfless, but what they never say is that selflessness in excess is self-erasure. She starts to lose the sound of her own voice, not because she doesn't have thoughts or feelings, but because she's been dismissed so often that she starts to believe maybe what she needs doesn't matter. Maybe love really is about suffering in silence. Maybe being a wife means being tired forever. Maybe joy is something that belongs to her children, her husband, her friends, but not to her, and so she gives. And gives until there's nothing left. And what does she get in return? A few obligatory thank yous, a moment of appreciation on Mother's Day, a passing compliment about how strong she is, but never a conversation about her dreams, her peace, her mental health, her purpose, because as long as the household is running and the family looks happy, everyone assumes she's okay. No one checks the heartbeat of the woman holding it all together. They only notice when she collapses, and even then they don't ask, "What broke you?" They ask, "Why now? Why can't you just be strong like you always were?" As if strength is infinite, as if she hasn't been bleeding emotionally for years while smiling through it, as if the armor she wears every day doesn't weigh her down with every step she takes. She becomes a function, a role, a necessity, but not a person. Her name is called when something is needed, but never when someone simply wants to know how she's feeling. She becomes the constant, the dependable one, and with that title comes the most dangerous invisibility, the kind where everyone sees her doing, but no one sees her being, no one sees her breaking, and what's worse is that she's surrounded by messages that glorify this. Books, movies, even religious and cultural teachings that romanticize the suffering wife. The woman who waits, who prays, who never raises her voice, who endures betrayal with forgiveness and disrespect with silence. And if she dares to speak out, to set a boundary, to demand more, she's suddenly too much, difficult, unappreciative. Society doesn't know what to do with a woman who wakes up and decides she is more than her sacrifices. The world says, "You're a wife now," but what that really means is, tone it down, don't be too ambitious, don't express too much, don't want too much, don't need too much, be happy with the life you have, even if it's slowly killing your spirit. Be grateful even if you're depleted, be kind, even when you're disrespected, because married women, apparently, exist to hold others up, not to be held, and in that environment, what happens to her soul? She starts to atrophy. Her inner world becomes a quiet place of unanswered prayers and unspoken dreams. She stops trying to be understood and starts learning how to survive unacknowledged. She builds altars in her heart to the things she once wanted: love, connection, passion, but now worships at the feet of duty and routine, because that's what society tells her is sacred. Even when she's hurting, she's expected to be soft, to serve with joy, to forgive instantly, to never speak harsh truths, because God forbid she shatter the illusion that everything is fine. God forbid she admit that being married doesn't automatically equal being fulfilled. God forbid she want more for herself. The danger of glorifying sacrifice is that it disguises neglect. It allows husbands, families, and even communities to ignore her humanity because they're too busy praising her endurance. But what they don't see is the quiet resentment building, the loneliness thickening like fog, the slow death of a woman who was once vibrant, now walking through life like a ghost in her own story. She wanted to be cherished, not used, supported, not just depended on, heard, not just tolerated. But every time she reached out, she was told, "This is what love looks like. It's not about you, it's about them. And so she began to believe that her needs were a threat to the family's peace, that her voice was too loud, that her dreams were distractions. So she folded them away like laundry and kept moving. And then one day, someone finally sees her, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger, maybe a man who says something simple like, "You seem tired." Or, "When's the last time someone asked how you are?" And suddenly the dam breaks, not because she's weak, but because she's been holding it all for too long, and now someone noticed. This is how emotional affairs begin. This is how breakdowns happen, not in explosions, but in silence, not through betrayal, but through neglect. When a woman is asked to give endlessly and never receive, it's only a matter of time before the emptiness begins to echo too loudly. And society will be quick to shame her when she falls, but no one will look back and say, "We let her starve while we praised her for smiling." What people don't understand is that the deepest hunger is not physical. It's emotional. It's the need to be loved as a whole person, not just a mother, not just a wife, but a woman with desires, with depth, with a soul that needs more than laundry lists and grocery runs to thrive. But she's been so conditioned to ignore herself that even asking for attention feels like rebellion. Even needing softness feels like weakness, and yet she's expected to be everything. To raise children, build homes, hold marriages, support careers, be emotionally available, and still look beautiful while doing it. But no one asks her if she's okay. No one says, "You're allowed to break." No one tells her that rest is not laziness, that solitude is not selfishness, that fulfillment is not a luxury. It's her right. We cannot keep pretending that praising women for their sacrifices is the same as loving them. It's not. Real love doesn't want her to suffer. Real love wants her to flourish. Real love doesn't just applaud her strength. It protects her softness. It sees her not just as a giver, but as someone who deserves to receive. And until that becomes the norm, we will keep losing women to silence, to depression, to disconnection, because a woman cannot pour from an empty cup, no matter how strong you think she is. She cannot love from a place of depletion, no matter how committed she is. And she should not have to sacrifice herself just to keep the illusion of a perfect life. Her needs matter, her voice matters, her joy matters, not as a reward for good behavior, but as a birthright. Because being married should never mean losing yourself. It should mean being loved enough to still be fully you. Awareness is not loud. It doesn't crash into your life like a tidal wave. It begins as a whisper. A subtle tug inside your soul, a question that refuses to stay quiet. It comes in moments when she's staring at herself in the mirror, not recognizing the woman looking back. It comes when she's lying in bed beside someone who doesn't see her anymore, and she realizes she hasn't felt alive in years. Awareness isn't about rebellion. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. She starts noticing the spaces where she once made herself smaller to keep the peace. She starts paying attention to the parts of her that went numb so others could feel safe. She starts feeling again, not because life got easier, but because she stopped lying to herself. That's the beginning of her awakening, not in anger, not in chaos, but in brutal, sacred honesty. She begins to see through the performance she's been conditioned to play. The perfect wife, the patient mother, the selfless woman. She realizes none of those labels ever asked who she really is. They only asked who she needed to become to be accepted. And when she finally sees that, the world as she knows it starts to crack. Because you can't unsee the truth, and once a woman sees clearly, she can never go back to pretending. She begins to question everything. Why she tolerates emotional distance in her marriage. Why she silences herself in conversations. Why she apologizes for being too tired, too emotional, too opinionated. Why her dreams are always placed last in line, and each question peels back a layer of the illusion. Each answer, no matter how painful, is a key to the prison she didn't even know she was living in. She realizes that she was trained to perform loyalty, not to experience freedom, that she was taught to choose stability over authenticity, that she was raised to be agreeable before she was raised to be whole. And suddenly, she's angry, not because she's bitter, but because she's awake. That's what awareness does. It disrupts everything. It shatters comfort zones. It demands a confrontation with the truth she's been too scared to face. And here's what society won't tell you. When a woman becomes aware, she becomes powerful, not because she suddenly changes everything around her, but because she finally stops betraying herself. She stops accepting crumbs and calling it love. She stops shrinking to fit into rooms that never honored her voice. She stops explaining her boundaries. She stops performing perfection. She stops waiting to be chosen and starts choosing herself. But this kind of transformation doesn't come without a cost. Because once she begins to awaken, people get uncomfortable. The ones who benefited from her silence will call her difficult. The ones who enjoyed her overgiving will call her selfish. The ones who never saw her depth will say she's changed. And she has, because awareness doesn't just open her eyes. It gives her the strength to walk away from anything that keeps her blind. She starts hearing her own thoughts again, feeling her own feelings. And even though it's overwhelming, it's also liberating, because for the first time, she's not filtering herself to be palatable. She's not editing her emotions to make someone else feel comfortable. She's not dimming her light to soothe fragile egos. She's not pretending to be fine when she's breaking. She is finally real. She looks back at the years she spent waiting to be noticed, waiting to be loved correctly, waiting for someone else to give her permission to be fully herself. And it hits her. She was never meant to wait for freedom. She was meant to take it. But she had to first believe she deserved it. And that's what awareness gives her, the clarity to see that her life doesn't have to revolve around being chosen. It can revolve around her choosing her worth, her joy, her truth. She understands now that marriage is not a license to disappear. That motherhood is not an erasure of identity. That commitment should never require her to abandon herself. And so, she starts rewriting the script, not for revenge, not for attention, but because she's done pretending that survival is enough. She wants to thrive. She wants to breathe fully, love deeply, speak loudly, live freely, and she knows now she can. It's in the quiet moments that her power begins to return, when she pours her coffee and sits in silence and for the first time feels no guilt for taking that moment. When she writes in her journal and acknowledges the dreams she buried for the sake of others, when she looks at her reflection and doesn't criticize but listens, when she goes for a walk, not to lose weight, not to escape, but simply to reconnect with her body, her breath, her being. She begins to make different choices. She says no without a justification. She says yes to things that light her soul on fire, even if others don't understand. She removes herself from relationships that thrive on her insecurity. She stops asking for validation. She stops looking for love in places that keep wounding her. She builds herself up from within, brick by brick, prayer by prayer, truth by truth, and she doesn't need everyone to understand. Because she's not awakening for applause. She's awakening for peace, for wholeness, for integrity. And that means she might lose people along the way. But she knows now that losing people who only liked the masked version of her is not loss, it's clarity. It's divine protection, it's a gift. She begins to realize that real love doesn't demand she sacrifice herself. Real love doesn't diminish her to feel superior. Real love doesn't resent her voice, her power, her fire. Real love joins her in growth. Real love celebrates her becoming. And if she hasn't known that kind of love yet, she stops blaming herself for it. Because now she sees clearly. It wasn't that she was unworthy. It's that she was surrounded by people who weren't ready to see her shine. And most importantly, she forgives herself, for all the years she stayed silent, for all the boundaries she let others cross, for all the ways she diminished her light to keep the peace. She doesn't carry shame for what she didn't know. Because now she does, and now everything is different. Awareness is not a one-time event. It's a journey, a shedding, a remembering, a returning. Every day she learns to listen to herself more deeply. Every day she honors her body when it says rest, her soul when it says this is not love, her intuition when it says you deserve more, and in doing so she becomes her own protector, her own advocate, her own home. The woman she is becoming is not angry, she's focused. She's not bitter, she's wise. She's not selfish, she's healed. She no longer tolerates disrespect disguised as love. She no longer participates in dynamics that require her to abandon herself. She no longer confuses loyalty with self-destruction, because she knows who she is now, and she knows what she's worth. She doesn't chase people. She doesn't beg for time, attention, or love. She knows that the right people don't require convincing. And the wrong ones don't deserve her energy. Her time is sacred. Her heart is sacred. Her presence is sacred. And she protects it like her life depends on it, because now she knows it does. She speaks with clarity. She walks with intention. She loves with discernment, and every step she takes is grounded in truth, not perfection, not performance, just raw, real truth, and that truth sets her free. This is what liberation looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, but rooted, unshakable. It's when a woman stops waiting to be rescued and starts rising, when she stops looking outward for validation and turns inward for alignment, when she stops playing roles and starts living her reality, when she stops surviving in silence and starts thriving in awareness, because now she sees, and now she chooses, and that choice, that bold, beautiful, unapologetic choice to live fully awake, is her power. Her rebirth, her return, her liberation.